Okay, so let's dive right in. We're going to talk about something pretty wild. One of the biggest, fastest, and honestly most brutal transformations a country has ever gone through. This is the story of how the Soviet Union tried to build a superpower, basically from the ground up, in just 10 years. Okay, let me ask you something. Put yourself in this position. You're in charge of a country that's like a full century behind everyone else. Technologically, economically, you're way behind. And you've got 10 years, just 10 years to catch up. Why? Because you're convinced that if you don't, you're going to be completely crushed. So, what do you do? I mean, really, what's the plan? Well, this wasn't just a thought experiment. This was the exact reality for the leader of the Soviet Union back in the 1920s.
All right, so let's paint the picture. It's the late 1920s, and the Soviet Union is now under the complete and total control of one person, Joseph Stalin.
So Stalin takes power, he looks around, and he sees a huge, huge problem. The Soviet Union, it's mostly a nation of farmers. Economically, it's weak. And when you compare it to the big industrial powers of the West, we're talking places like the United States or Germany, they are light years behind in technology.
And for Stalin, this wasn't just, oh, we should probably catch up. No, he saw it as a life or death situation. And this quote from him, it tells you everything you need to know about his mindset. He literally said, "We are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make good this distance in 10 years. Either we do it or they will crush us." I mean, listen to that. That incredible urgency, that almost paranoid feeling, that's the engine driving everything that's about to happen.
So, with this ticking clock in his head, Stalin came up with a plan. And it wasn't just a small change. It was a radical, massive solution. A great leap forward.
And in 1928, he unleashed it. It was called the First Five-Year Plan. The goal itself was simple to say, but massive to actually do. Industrialize the entire country super fast. And the key part? Every single decision would be made by the government. Now, this idea is super important to understand. It's called central planning. It's a completely different way to run an economy. See, in most economies today, what gets made is decided by us, the consumers. If a lot of people buy smartphones, companies make more smartphones. Simple. But with central planning, the state, the government, makes all the decisions. They decide what gets built, how much of it to make, and even who gets to have it. I mean, think about it. The entire economy was basically being run out of one single office in Moscow. The government would tell every single factory exactly how much stuff they had to produce. These were called quotas. The state owned all the factories, all the mines, all the resources. They even told people what their jobs would be and where they had to move to do them. The whole idea of supply and demand, yeah, that was just tossed right out the window.
So, with this massive plan in motion, what do they actually start building?
The plan was laser-focused on one thing: heavy industry. We're talking coal, iron, and steel. The fundamental building blocks you need to create a modern army and an industrial powerhouse. And what about things people actually needed for their daily lives, like clothes or shoes? Totally ignored. The goal wasn't to make life more comfortable. It was all about building a foundation of national power.
And to really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this example, Magnitogorsk. This wasn't just a factory. They built an entire city and one of the biggest steel plants on the planet from absolute scratch, way out in the middle of nowhere. It was actually based on steel mills in the US, but the workforce? Tens of thousands of people were shipped out there, forced to live in tents and even mud huts while they built this thing through these insane Russian winters. It's a perfect symbol of the whole project. Unbelievable ambition on one side and just immense human sacrifice on the other.
So you've got to be wondering, how on earth did the government get people to put up with conditions like that? Well, a big part of it was propaganda. They basically launched a massive PR campaign, creating national heroes to inspire or pressure everyone else.
And this gave rise to something called the Stakhanomite movement. The idea they sold to the people was pretty appealing. Hey, if you break production records, you can be a hero, just like this guy, Alexei Stakhanov. You'll get rewards, a better apartment, more food, you'll be famous. That was the promise. But the reality? It was a nightmare. It put this crazy pressure on everybody to hit impossible goals. People were rushing, which meant machinery was constantly breaking, and the stuff they made was often low quality. And if you failed, or were even just late for work, the punishments were harsh. You could even have your food rations taken away.
Okay, so building all these giant factories and buying all this machinery, that costs a ton of money. So the big question is, where did Stalin get the cash?
The answer is pretty shocking. Stalin decided to pay for it all by basically declaring war on his own country's farmers.
The official name for this policy was collectivization, and it was exactly what it sounds like. Millions and millions of regular farmers were forced, often at gunpoint, to give up everything, their private land, their tools, their farm animals, and join these gigantic farms that were controlled by the state.
Now, from the government's point of view, there was a cold, clear logic to all this. It was a four-step plan. Step 1, force all the farmers onto these new collective farms to seize control of the food supply. Step 2, take a huge chunk of that grain to feed all the new workers in the cities. Step 3, sell whatever grain was left over to other countries. And Step 4, use that money from the exports to buy all the high-tech industrial machinery they needed from the West. You see, the farmers and their food were just a means to an end.
Well, as you can imagine, the farmers did not just quietly go along with this plan. The biggest resistance came from a group that the government started calling kulaks. Now, kulak was basically a label for the more successful, more experienced farmers, and because they were independent and had some to lose, Stalin saw them as a major obstacle. So he just declared them enemies of the revolution.
And faced with losing absolutely everything they had worked for, many of these kulaks fought back in the only way they could. They'd burn their own crops or slaughter their animals rather than hand them over to the state. But the government's response was just merciless. Millions were arrested. They were deported to brutal labor camps or just exiled to the most remote, empty parts of the country. This conflict was a disaster. It didn't just destroy millions of lives, it also ripped the most skilled and productive people right out of the farming system.
So, after all this, what was the result of Stalin's 10-year gamble? Well, the legacy it left behind is one of just shocking extremes. On the one hand, you have the human cost. The absolute chaos of collectivization, combined with the government taking all the food, led directly to one of the most horrific famines in human history. We're talking somewhere between 5 and 7 million people starved to death.
And yet, here's the crazy other side of the coin. At the exact same time millions were starving, the industrial numbers were going through the roof. In just a few years, coal and iron production literally doubled. Steel production shot up by 1/3. If you just looked at the numbers, you'd say the plan was a massive success. The Soviet Union was becoming an industrial giant.
So that's the final verdict, right? It's this story of two extremes. Did the plan work? In a way, yes, it absolutely transformed the USSR from a nation of farmers into a real industrial power. It laid the groundwork for the military superpower it would become. And it did massively increase things like literacy and technical skills. But the cost, my gosh, it caused one of the worst famines ever. Millions of people lost their lives or had them completely destroyed, and it created a broken, inefficient farming system that would cause problems for the Soviet Union for decades to come.
And that leaves us with the big, haunting question at the end of all this. Was it really necessary? Could they have built a modern nation without this level of extreme, unimaginable human cost? Was there another way to do it? And honestly, that's a question people are still debating to this very day.